For years, she remained the calm amidst the royal storm. But now, Duchess Sophie has spoken, and her words have sent tremors through Buckingham Palace. What prompted the Countess of Wessex to finally reveal the truth? Why now, after all this time, does her voice threaten to redraw the lines that divide the House of Windsor? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a sudden yet deliberate move, an embargoed statement quietly distributed to select journalists with close palace connections. There was no fanfare, no press conference, no camera flash, just a sealed envelope, weighty not with paper but with purpose. Sophie, once known as the firm's most discreet royal, had finally broken her silence. The Duchess of Edinburgh, who for decades built a reputation of loyalty, duty, and unwavering support, chose her moment with the precision of someone who'd been waiting far too long. Those who had dismissed her as passive were now scrambling to reframe their narratives. The royal watchers knew something seismic had shifted. For years, Sophie's image was wrapped in discretion, polished, precise, and never out of line. She didn't seek attention, nor did she drift towards scandal. But that very silence, once hailed as her greatest virtue, has now emerged as a powerful tool of disruption. In her carefully worded declaration, it wasn't what Sophie said, but what she didn't say, that rattled the palace walls. References to realigned roles, dignity misunderstood, and loyalties stretched beyond their limits hinted at an undercurrent of pain long suppressed. It wasn't a scream, it was a surgical strike. The clues were always there if you knew where to look. From her unreadable expression during Camilla's coronation to the rare times she appeared distant during public engagements, Sophie's eyes betrayed what her lips would not. At several key royal events she was present but never central, her smile subdued, her presence polite but detached. Palace insiders whispered of her growing discomfort, of tensions behind closed doors, of long silences between meetings that once brimmed with camaraderie. They said Sophie never complained. That may have been true, but silence, as we now know, is not the absence of conflict, it is its concealment. And then came the whisper of betrayal, not loud, not public, but devastating. Sophie's words in her statement hinted at a moment, an incident that redefined boundaries and called into question the values we once shared. Though names weren't given, the implications were loud enough to echo across the palace. Was it about Camilla? About Edward? About decisions made in back rooms where Sophie's presence was no longer requested? No one knew for sure, but everyone had a theory. The mystery only fueled the storm. The palace's response was one of instant containment. Press lines lit up within minutes. Advisors were summoned. Internal emails reportedly warned staff to refrain from any comment on the matter. Crisis meetings were held behind thick wooden doors, while courtiers scrambled to determine just how much damage one woman's truth could inflict. But damage control came too late. The public had already seized the moment. And in the heart of Buckingham, a quiet duchess had finally spoken loud enough to make the entire monarchy listen. As the dust swirled through the palace corridors, one question echoed louder than the rest: what exactly forced Duchess Sophie to draw her own line in the royal sand? This wasn't a moment of spontaneous courage. It was the final act in a war waged behind royal smiles. What began as subtle slights evolved into deliberate exclusions, and Sophie's loyalty became a bargaining chip in a power game she never asked to play. In the wake of Queen Elizabeth's passing, the royal house found itself split, not by blood, but by belief. One side clung to the values of steadfast service and discretion. The other, hungry for modern optics and strategic consolidation, moved swiftly to rewrite influence, and Sophie, once seen as the Queen's quiet shadow, was left out in the cold. The tension between her and Camilla didn't erupt with theatrics, it simmered beneath civility, clothed in carefully measured silences and cold glances exchanged across long tables. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Invitations once sent with warmth now arrived late, if at all. At charity events, Sophie was strategically placed at the edges, her contributions overlooked, her legacy slowly being erased in real time. It began with awkward glances at receptions, whispered changes to seating arrangements, and key introductions that never happened. At one high-profile dinner, a guest seated beside Sophie later revealed that she had remained polite, even as Camilla made a point of monopolizing conversation, with ambassadors ignoring Sophie's years of groundwork. The message was clear. In this new order, relevance had been redefined. The ascension of King Charles only deepened the divide. Camilla's influence expanded overnight, and with it came a recalibration of royal hierarchy. No longer just the supportive consort, Camilla had begun crafting her own circle, one that subtly, yet methodically, excluded those loyal to the late Queen's ethos. Insiders soon began murmuring about a quiet but deliberate sidelining. One former aide spoke of Sophie's ghost status, always present, never acknowledged. The emotional toll was unmistakable. She, who had once walked beside the Queen during moments of national mourning, now found herself on the periphery. And yet Sophie held her ground, hoping diplomacy would preserve the dignity she had built over decades. But the walls were closing in. Camilla's allies in the palace took up more space, both physically and metaphorically, while Sophie's requests were quietly rerouted, her scheduled engagements quietly reassigned. Every closed door was a signal, every delay a warning. The conflict was not just personal, it was symbolic. Sophie represented a fading loyalty to the monarch who had valued substance over spotlight. Camilla represented the shifting tide, a new structure where power was more visible, more curated, and dangerously more exclusive. William and Catherine were said to have noticed. Sources close to them claimed they offered Sophie subtle gestures of solidarity. But they too were bound by duty. Speaking out would have ignited a fire none of them were ready to contain. And so Sophie stood alone in the storm, her silence stretched to the breaking point. Each passing engagement chipped away at her resolve, each orchestrated exclusion reminding her that silence might no longer be synonymous with dignity. It might in fact be mistaken for submission. But no palace feud brews in isolation, and as Sophie's isolation deepened, unexpected alliances began to form in the most shadowed wings of Windsor. As royal roles shifted, so did royal loyalties. Lines weren't just drawn, they were enforced. What began as quiet preferences soon earned into visible rifts, with Sophie caught in the undertow of a monarchic reorganization. When Charles took the throne, the reshuffling of royal responsibilities was immediate and ruthless. Under the guise of streamlining the monarchy, the new regime quietly reallocated ceremonial roles, trimming down what they called the working royal list. But those close to the palace knew the narrative was far more calculated. Roles that had long belonged to Sophie, duties she had carried out with quiet dedication, were handed to others with barely a word of notice. She wasn't just overlooked, she was erased, deliberately and with purpose. Her name was conspicuously absent from key patronage announcements, and long-time charitable affiliations were reassigned without even the courtesy of consultation. The monarchy had chosen its new face, and Sophie wasn't part of the vision. What hurt more than the exclusions was the process behind them. The palace's internal councils, once welcoming of Sophie's insights, now shut their doors. She was no longer summoned for planning meetings, no longer briefed ahead of press announcements. Her relevance was being chipped away behind closed doors. Prince Edward tried to quietly push back. One palace aide reported that he had requested a private audience with Charles to address his wife's marginalization. But the response was cold and bureaucratic. "This isn't personal," Charles allegedly replied. But to Sophie it was nothing but personal. Meanwhile, the internal hierarchy subtly began to favor a different set of players. Beatrice and Eugenie, once peripheral figures, suddenly found themselves invited to key dinners, tapped for ceremonial events, their public profiles polished. Insiders noted a clear connection. Both had fallen into Camilla's favor. Their acceptance of the Queen Consort's growing power came with rewards, while Sophie's resistance, however dignified, came with consequences. The more she distanced herself from this recalibration, the further she was pushed into obscurity. Anne, however, was not silent. Though she rarely makes waves publicly, the Princess Royal is not known for yielding. Tension between her and Camilla grew more noticeable in private circles, particularly as Anne voiced concerns about Sophie's diminishing role. Though never stated outright, her allegiance to her sister-in-law became a quiet form of resistance. Together, Anne and Sophie formed an unspoken alliance, two women bonded not just by bloodlines, but by the pain of watching decades of service dismissed like political chess pieces. Behind the scenes, the media landscape shifted just as strategically. Stories about Sophie's contributions that were once easy to find began to vanish, buried under puff pieces highlighting Camilla's rise or the fresh glow surrounding Beatrice and Eugenie. PR teams worked overtime to reshape the public narrative. Leaks were managed. Photos were selected with careful intent. The quiet war was now being waged on multiple fronts, and Sophie found herself surrounded by curated silence. Her legacy, once dignified and steady, was under siege. But even as Sophie navigated these treacherous tides, it was one personal moment witnessed by few, felt by many, that would light the fuse for her revelation. Every story has a breaking point. For Sophie, it came behind closed doors at a royal gathering where a single comment, dismissive and devastating, broke her composure and cemented her resolve to speak out. The moment didn't arrive with a confrontation, nor did it play out before flashing cameras. It happened in the subdued setting of a private pre-Christmas dinner at Windsor, among familiar faces cloaked in formality and tradition. What should have been a quiet evening of family and festivity turned into a defining fracture point. Camilla, seated comfortably within the inner circle she had cultivated, turned to a guest and remarked, with a smug lift of her voice, that minor royals really ought to know their place by now. The room froze. It wasn't the words alone, it was the timing, the audience, and the unmistakable target of that remark. All eyes shifted, even if just slightly, toward Sophie. The Duchess, who had for years stood as a symbol of dignity and silence, sat stunned. Around the long oak table, silence grew louder than any rebuttal could have. It was the kind of silence that tells you who has power, and who no longer does. For Sophie, it was an emotional ambush wrapped in passive aggressio. But it wasn't just her pain that filled the room, it was Lady Louise's. The young royal, never one to attract headlines, was present and close enough to hear the remark. Witnesses later said her face fell in disbelief, her eyes fixed on her mother as if waiting for someone, anyone, to speak up in her defense. No one did. Not even Edward, whose fury, though palpable, was locked behind years of royal conditioning. The protocol of silence had become a prison, and no one dared to shatter its walls. Sophie excused herself from the table not with rage, but with resolve. Her exit wasn't dramatic, but it was final in its tone. She didn't storm out, she withdrew, leaving behind a vacuum no one at that table could ignore. That night marked the end of her internal negotiation between loyalty and self-respect. Later that evening, long after the gathering had dispersed and the palace returned to its polished stillness, Sophie sat alone and began drafting what would become the most consequential words of her public life. A statement that wouldn't be published for weeks, but which had already been written in spirit at that dinner. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The pain was layered, the betrayal cumulative. For years she had protected the institution, choosing silence over scandal, dignity over defense. But in that moment, surrounded by those who chose complicity over compassion, Sophie understood that her silence was being used against her. It wasn't just a dismissal of her tie. It was a dismissal of her worth, her years of service, her unwavering loyalty to the crown and to the late Queen. And worst of all, it happened in front of her daughter. What followed was not just an act of rebellion, but a meticulous unraveling of secrets Sophie had long protected in the name of duty. Buried in silence for years, a series of letters, handwritten and haunting, offer a glimpse into a duchess's anguish. Written to Queen Elizabeth herself, they reveal Sophie's long struggle to remain loyal in a kingdom cracking from within. Long before her statement made headlines, Sophie had poured her heart into ink. Tucked away in private correspondence between herself and Queen Elizabeth, these letters told a truth the public never saw, a truth raw with fear, confusion, and a deep, aching sense of betrayal. These weren't political memos or formal notes passed between royals. They were confessions, pleas, echoes of a woman trapped between duty and disillusionment, Each line revealed the emotional cost of silence. Sophie wrote of feeling erased, not just as a royal but as a human being. She described the subtle erasures, her roles reassigned, her presence diminished, and the silent grief of watching Anne too being undermined in the name of progress. In one letter, she referenced her growing unease with what she called the invisible push, describing how rooms she once entered with purpose now felt colder, as if her mere presence disrupted a design she was no longer part of. She confessed her struggle to remain dignified as whispers grew louder and invitations fewer. She wrote of Camilla without ever naming her, instead referring to the crown's new shadow whose influence changed the atmosphere of even the most sacred royal spaces. The Queen, ever diplomatic even in private, responded with caution. Her replies, though few, were filled with quiet sympathy. She encouraged Sophie to stay the course, to remember her value, and to trust that time would reveal all. But one letter stood apart. It was dated just weeks before Queen Elizabeth's passing. In it, Sophie recounted a meeting she had overheard, one she had never meant to witness, that confirmed her growing suspicion the monarchy was being restructured around power, not principle. And she feared the damage it would do not just to her, but to the legacy of a reign built on quiet strength. That letter ended with a phrase now being repeated in hushed tones by those who've seen it: "When silence becomes complicity, I will speak." What happened next remains a mystery. But somehow these letters, once sealed in personal archives, found their way into the hands of a journalist with long-standing ties to the palace. Carefully selected excerpts were passed along, never officially published, yet circulated just widely enough to stir speculation. Many believe Sophie herself had them released, not as an act of defiance, but as a quiet confirmation of everything she later declared publicly. It wasn't a leak. It was a controlled burn. These letters weren't meant to destroy. They were meant to explain. They weren't about vengeance, they were about truth. And they served as the emotional prelude to what Sophie would eventually make official: that the lines drawn in the palace were not sudden strokes of change, but fractures that had long been spreading, hidden just beneath the surface of protocol. But written words weren't enough. Sophie knew the time had come to put her voice to truth and expose the architecture of royal division. In less than 300 words, Sophie dismantled the illusion of unity. Her carefully chosen phrasing left no doubt lines had been drawn not out of preference, but necessity, and she was no longer afraid of where she stood. The statement, released without warning on a cold morning, landed like a royal thunderclap. It was neither dramatic in tone nor overt in blame, but it carried the weight of years unspoken. Sophie referred to boundaries that must now be honoured, devotion rendered invisible, and trust broken behind closed doors. It was a reckoning wrapped in restraint, a confession framed with elegance, but beneath its surface, the message was explosive. While she didn't mention names, the subtext was unmistakable. The senior royals who had slowly orchestrated her exclusion, those who claimed unity while practicing division, had now been publicly called out, not with rage, but with precision. The public, long accustomed to palace silence, erupted in response. Social media lit up within minutes. Hashtags like Stand With Sophie and The Quiet Royal Speaks trended across platforms, while media outlets scrambled to provide coverage without triggering legal repercussions. Op-eds were drafted before the ink on her words had even dried. For many, Sophie had emerged as a symbol of resilience. She had endured, watched, suffered, and finally, she had spoken. For those who had long sensed a quiet war within the royal household, the statement was a confirmation of every whispered suspicion. But inside the palace, chaos reigned. For 48 hours there was no official response. Not a word from Clarence's house, not a press release, just silence louder and more telling than any denial. Behind the scenes, sources revealed frantic meetings. Crisis teams huddled over strategy, trying to calculate the risk of responding versus the danger of ignoring the fallout. A storm was brewing, and the monarchy had no script for this level of personal rebellion. Then, quietly, another twist unfolded. Catherine was seen entering Bagshaw Tea Park under discreet but unmistakable circumstances. Though no official comment was made, palace watchers knew what this signaled. The Princess of Wales, arguably the most influential royal in the public eye, had made a personal visit to Sophie. Whether it was solidarity, strategy, or sisterhood, it sent a clear signal that Sophie was not as alone as she had been made to feel. The house that had once shunned her now faced the reality of its miscalculation. Soon after, Edward cancelled 2 scheduled appearances, with aides citing private family matters. Few believed that explanation. Instead, many saw it for what it was, a subtle but unwavering stand beside his wife. For the first time in years, the narrative was shifting not from palace control, but from within. And in the echo of Sophie's words, power began to move in a direction no one expected. Yet Sophie's declaration did more than expose. Its ripple effect was swift, revealing not just alliances, but fractures previously disguised as formality. When one voice breaks the silence, others find the courage to follow. What began as a solitary act by Sophie unleashed a royal reckoning, reinvigorating bonds with those once deemed powerless. It started subtly, not with speeches or statements, but with symbols. Days after Sophie's statement gripped the public, Princess Anne appeared at a veterans' memorial wearing a brooch rarely seen, one known to be nearly identical to a piece Sophie often wore. To most, it was nothing more than a tasteful accessory. But to those who understand the language of the royals, it was a message. Anne had chosen her side. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. She, who had long kept to herself, was signaling solidarity with her sister-in-law, showing that quiet strength still had a place in the new order the monarchy was trying to silence. Zara Tindall followed next, not through traditional channels, but with a cryptic social media post that read, "Sometimes silence doesn't protect the ones we love, it buries them. No context, no photo." But within minutes, followers tied it to the firestorm surrounding Sophie. Zara, who has always walked a tightrope between royalty and independence, had broken protocol, and in doing so, cracked open the narrative further. These weren't outbursts, they were coordinated ripples in a sea that had long been still. Meanwhile, Lady Louise, Sophie's daughter, often protected from public scrutiny, stepped into the light in her own right. At a youth leadership event, she delivered a poised and heartfelt speech about resilience, choice, and standing firm in the face of adversity. It was vague enough to pass palace approval, but personal enough that no one could miss the message. "I learned everything I know from watching someone hold their dignity when the world didn't make space for it," she said. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a quiet declaration that the next generation had taken note. Behind the curtain, Catherine's role grew more complicated. Though he remained officially silent, whispers from Kensington Palace described growing unease over Sophie's treatment. It was no secret that Catherine and Sophie shared a bond beyond formality, built on shared responsibilities, mutual respect, and a private understanding of what it means to serve without glory. Catherine's visit to Bagshot Park had been more than a gesture. It was an alignment, and when the Princess of Wales aligns, the palace listens, even if it doesn't want to. But not everyone was pleased. Prince William, caught between his mother-in-law's ambition and his wife's empathy, found himself walking a razor-thin line. His public composure never faltered, but those close to him noted a noticeable tension, an emotional distancing that hinted at quiet conflict. Loyalty was no longer a matter of bloodlines. It had become a question of conscience. As these alliances rekindled, the divide inside the palace sharpened. Camilla's inner circle advisors, sympathizers and enablers tightened their grip on the corridors of power, but they weren't the only force anymore. The so-called old guard, those who held fast to the Queen's values, who found kinship in quiet service, were beginning to reawaken. No longer content to stand in shadows, they moved with purpose. The balance was shifting. A house once ruled by control and consent was now split by conscience and rebellion. But behind palace gates, the king faced his own crisis: how to contain a storm that was no longer whispered but roared across headlines. He had hoped silence would hold the walls together. But now, the king must face the fallout of a family implosion. What Charles did behind closed doors could either mend the monarchy or deepen the fracture beyond repair. The moment Sophie's statement ignited the public imagination, the king was forced into an arena he spent his reign avoiding family conflict made uncomfortably public. Within hours, an emergency meeting was called. Senior advisors, PR strategists, and trusted aides were summoned to Clarence's house, their discussions cloaked in confidentiality, but the urgency was impossible to conceal. The question looming above them was simple yet damning: should the crown respond? And if so, how? The silence thus far had only inflamed the issue, and each hour that passed widened the divide between public sympathy and palace control. But the meeting behind closed doors revealed deeper fractures. Camilla, whose power had grown steadily since Charles's accession, reportedly pushed hard for a firm response. She demanded Sophie be disciplined, a term that sent shivers down the spines of more traditional advisors who understood the weight of public sentiment. She saw Sophie's statement as insubordination, a challenge to the carefully constructed image of unity she and Charles had projected. But Charles, caught between his queen's ambition and his brother's wounded loyalty, hesitated. Not out of weakness, but out of recognition. This wasn't just a rogue duchess causing a stir, this was a reckoning. Privately, Charles arranged a secret meeting with Prince Edward. What was said remains unknown, but those close to the situation claim it was emotionally charged. The brothers, once united under the shadow of their mother's expectations, now stood on opposite shores of a rising tide. Edward, dignified but resolute, is said to have laid bare the personal toll the institution had inflicted on his wife, and Charles, torn between reigning and relating, reportedly sat in uncharacteristic silence. Inside the king, a conflict brewed. A man who had waited a lifetime to wear the crown now faced the reality that power without peace was its own burden. He had built his monarchy on reform, on the promise of stability, yet here he stood, presiding over a court split by whispers, alliances, and suppressed resentment. He knew that siding with Camilla too overtly would fracture what remained of public goodwill. But to condemn her insistence for retribution would unravel the foundation of their reign. So, in a move that would only raise more questions, Charles chose inaction. No statement, no appearance, no acknowledgement. Instead, he opted for delay, a tactic often mistaken for strategy. But this time it backfired. Speculation exploded. Was the king divided in his own home? Was he silently supporting Sophie? Or was the monarchy simply paralyzed by its own contradictions? But even as the monarch wrestled with diplomacy, it was the people who had already chosen sides, and their verdict would reshape the legacy of an entire generation. This isn't just a feud, it's a reckoning. The lines Duchess Sophie spoke of are now etched in royal stone, and as the world watches the fallout, one thing is painfully clear: silence is no longer loyalty, it's complicity. The public, once passive observers of royal spectacle, has now become an active force in reshaping perception. Polls, social media movements, and widespread commentary increasingly favor Sophie, not as a rebel, but as a truth-teller, an emblem of integrity within a dynasty known for discretion over confrontation. Her statement, restrained yet resolute, tapped into a sentiment long simmering beneath the surface, that not all royals have equal voice, and not all silence is noble. For many, Sophie's stance shattered the illusion of unity and replaced it with something far more compelling: honesty. The press wasted no time dividing the House of Windsor into two symbolic courts. On one side, Camilla, flanked by carefully managed narratives, royal advisors, and those eager to align with the new hierarchy. On the other, Sophie, Anne, and the legacy values associated with Queen Elizabeth: quiet service, humility, and earned respect. Headlines no longer speak in vague terms. Instead, they draw bold lines between Camilla's circle and what many now refer to as the Old Guard. The effect is seismic. Each public appearance, every quote, is now seen as part of a larger chessboard of power and loyalty. And Sophie, once thought peripheral, now stands at the very center of the conversation. Her role within the monarchy has transformed not into that of a provocateur, but of a pillar. She is no longer the quiet figure beside Edward, but the Duchess who rewrote the rules of royal restraint. Without theatrics or scandal, she has asserted a new kind of influence, dignified defiance. Her strength lies in what she chose not to say, in how she forced a centuries-old institution to confront its own contradictions. A generational shift is also unfolding, almost imperceptibly but undeniably. Lady Louise, Charlotte and Zara are now viewed through a different lens, not just as heirs to tradition, but as torchbearers of Sophie's courage. Their future engagements, education and public personas will be shaped by the path Sophie has paved, a path that dares to balance duty with identity. Already, conversations have begun around Lady Louise's potential elevation, Zara's increasing voice in royal engagements, and even Charlotte's emerging composure that mirrors her aunt's race under pressure. Meanwhile, Camilla's carefully managed image has begun to falter. Attempts to restore favor through soft press and carefully staged appearances are being met with skepticism. Her team's silence in the wake of Sophie's statement has only deepened public suspicion. And with every step taken to reclaim control, the narrative only slips further from their grasp. The monarchy, once a fortress of stability, now teeters at a crossroads. Its future doesn't hinge on ceremony or crown, but on credibility, and that may well rest in the hands of the very woman it tried to diminish. In the end, this isn't about titles or tiaras. It's about truth and the cost of suppressing it for too long. What Sophie ignited is more than a moment, it's a movement, a shift from blind loyalty to earned respect. And the institution will never be the same. And so, the Duchess who once chose silence has now redrawn the map of power, forever altering the fate of Britain's most enduring institution. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.